Hey everybody, it's me. I just wanted to talk about what happened last night in London. As I'm sure you're aware by now, there were a series of attacks in London last night, and give you some analysis, my analysis on what happened and why it happened. Where do we go from here? Now, of course, a week ago there were the Manchester attacks, and last night there were attacks in London. And the first conclusion would be that this is going to be a series of ongoing attacks. Well, I want to point out that there is an election in England, or excuse me, in Britain, coming up on, I believe, Tuesday or Wednesday, I think. I can't remember right offhand. And the Conservatives called the election thinking that they were going to have a huge victory over Labour. But in recent weeks, they've seen their lead pretty much shrink to nil, which is always an indicator that they could be primed for an upset. Well, ISIS tends to prefer, and groups like ISIS tend to prefer conservative leadership in places like Britain, United States, because they tend to want to fight. Conservative leadership tends to want to be very, very tough, very, very head-on, which is exactly what ISIS wants. The kind of fight they know that they can win supporters over to their cause. Because, hey, if big, bad America's coming to fight us, they're coming to fight you, you got to join our side and take on the big, bad dogs known as the United States and Britain. Whereas Obama, to his credit, understood that this is a fight that isn't going to be a simple fight. It's a fight where you have to basically undercut your enemies. But the attacks last night are going to bring people to want to, they want to come back and they want to, I guess you can say, they want to punch back hard or harder. And that's the natural human instinct, which, if you know anything about psychology, you know that if you want to get somebody to get on your side, you punch first, and then the other guy punches back, and then you tell the people that you want to win over, hey, they punched it back at us. It's like in in hockey, where if you want to get the other guy to fight you, you punch him first, and then they punch back, and the referee sees the guy that punches back first, sees it, and he calls a penalty. So, not all the time, but more often than not. So, it's the provocation that ISIS wants. They want to provoke the West into a fight. They basically want to have the apocalyptic showdown. And there are plenty in the West who want to give them that. Because, hey, it's good for them in military-industrial complex to have that big, big fight where lots of people die. And, hey, there's a population control. Lots of people die. Military-industrial complex makes a lot of money. A lot of poor people die. A lot of rich people stay safe, allegedly. Unless they decide to release a few nukes, and then, well, there you go. But anyhow, it's important to remember that the London attacks are not necessarily a wave of attacks. Now, I could be wrong. If the election comes and, let's say, for example, Labour wins and there's another attack this time next weekend, let's say in Liverpool or York or Glasgow or someplace like that, then I could be completely wrong, which would not be the first time, nor would it be the last. But my point is this: attacking terrorism is not like attacking, say, the Nazis in Germany or Afghanistan, thousands of troops in Iraq, and how tired people were of both wars, which in large part was the reason why Obama won in 2008 because people were tired of fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, ISIS has learned that lesson. And that's not necessarily saying we should have stayed in both countries. In many ways, it was simply the best choice at the time. But when I think about it, ISIS is not worried about what we think. They want more people to their cause. You see, in a numbers game, they're very small compared to us. They're tiny. If, let's say, Donald Trump decides all-out war with ISIS is needed to go in, a full-scale invasion of Syria and Iraq. Forget the geopolitical complications in that for a moment. The United States would wipe the floor with ISIS. But this is the problem. ISIS would get recruits big time, or whatever group comes after ISIS. And you have to remember, ISIS is now in Libya. It would not surprise me if they were in Egypt and causing instability there. They want chaos. They thrive in chaos. And the problem is, they're not a simple, easy to define enemy. And this is the problem. We have not quite figured out how to fight a war on terror, much less win a war on terror. And this goes to both Democrats and Republicans. When you look at what happened last night, it is another battle against an enemy that quite honestly knows that they are fighting a battle that in many ways they can't win. But, and this is important to remember, they're willing to die for it. We've never fought an enemy where the enemy is more than happy to die for their cause. In cases are overjoyed to die for their cause. Not even the Japanese kamikazes were jumping for joy at the thought of dying for the emperor. They did it, but in many ways they had to either be drunk on sake or something else to fully get into that. But when you think about ISIS, these are a bunch of radical, very small percentage of Muslims. And that's important to remember, because it's like comparing, here's the comparison. If you're going to judge all of Islam through ISIS, then you got to judge all of Christianity through the KKK. And that's an apt comparison. Very simply put, if you compare the actions of a few thousand terrorists to the actions of 1.3 billion people. That's billion with a B, folks. Then, are we going to say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a bloodthirsty terrorist? No. The late great Muhammad Ali, was he a bloodthirsty terrorist? No. So there you go. You can't lump all Muslims into one basket. It's like saying, would you like it if every American were compared to a ignorant, racist redneck who waves a Confederate flag in the back of his truck and, wants to shoot all the black folks? Of course not. You're smarter than that. The vast majority of Americans abhor that kind of thing, at least in some levels. But here's the thing. We are in a very turbulent time after 9/11. We're still in it. We're 16 years in the post 9/11 world. It's hard to believe 16 years. But it seems like it wasn't all that long ago when these terrorists threw flew planes into the World Trade Center towers. But the danger's always been there. I mean, it's not like this is anything new to England to face terrorism. The IRA back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, I remember that. A lot of older folks remember that, yeah, there was plenty of worries about car bombs, but not by bloodthirsty radical Islamists, but by bloodthirsty Irish Republican Army members. So people that say, well, this is a bunch of radicals, these are a bunch of people who've looked at history and have seen what they think works. And that's a scary concept, because in many ways, terrorism worked for the IRA. You don't have to agree with their tactics, but the end result was they got a peace agreement in Northern Ireland that they may not have entirely agreed with, but works for them. But it's important to also remember that this is not going to be a war that will be easily defined, will have an easily defined victory. World War II, in many ways, was not defined. We knew it when the war ended. It ended in two particular days, one in May of 1945 and one in August of 1945, when Germany surrendered in May and Japan surrendered in August. There is not going to be one ceremony where ISIS is going to surrender. And here's the thing. ISIS, we may kill every member of ISIS. That doesn't mean we may kill every member of Al-Qaeda. That doesn't mean we win the war on terror. Because here's the thing. How do you defeat a concept? That's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against the concept. Not an enemy, not a nation, not even an army. We're fighting against a concept. That's an intangible enemy. And if you put it in one way, the enemy has a point. I mean, let's face it, the United States has not been perfect. If you look at our history, we've had plenty of errors, but that doesn't mean that the concept in itself is a good concept. So, looking at what's coming up, the election will probably be a narrow conservative victory in England, and I should say in Britain. And I think a lot of Tories will be very glad of it, even though they'll probably have a very small majority. It may not even be a majority government, but they may win the election based on these attacks. And I think ISIS wants them to win the election, based on the fact that I think ISIS really likes the fact that Donald Trump is president. They want us to attack them. They want to fight. They want the kind of fight that Donald Trump wants to give them, because it's good for propaganda. And this is the big point. This is not a war that's going to be won on bombs and bullets. We got far more than they do. But they know that the kind of fight that they can win is a war of attrition. Wear us down to the point where we don't want to fight anymore. And then one or two things happens. We give up the fight, like we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, realizing it was pointless, which in many ways it was. Or we do the unthinkable. We use the nukes. And that is what ISIS really wants. Now you're saying to yourself, But John, why would ISIS want to see millions and millions of their fellow Muslims die in a nuclear attack? Well, think about it. They want to fight. And you'll have to give me a moment because I'm about to cross the street here. I gotta look both ways to make sure I don't get turned into pancake batter. I think we're good to go. Alright, looks like we're gonna make it okay. But let's face it. Groups like ISIS love seeing a fight. They love seeing their people die because they go, see, the West is the evil, not us. They see anybody that does it. Oh, hang on a second. My earphones came out. Sorry. But sorry about that, folks. I'm not in a professional studio. I'm out basically walking right now. So, ISIS is looking for a fight where they can say, look, the West are the bloodthirsty ones, the West are the bad guys. There are a lot of people on the fence in the Middle East and the Arab world. They don't like us, but they really don't like ISIS. So, ISIS, since they essentially have home field advantage in this battle, want to convince these people that are on the fence that we're the real bad guys. Now, we know we're not the bad guys. But the key to victory is convincing those on the fence that we're not the bad guys, that we have their best interest at heart. Well, to some extent, you'll have to pardon the fire truck going by. The best interest is something that we have a problem with. Problem defining. If you're a conservative or a neocon, you want to bring them the gifts, the Western gifts of democracy and freedom and free market capitalism, which works great here, but may not work great in a place where it's not really ever existed. And look at the end of the Cold War. For example, when the Soviet Union fell apart, the United States and Europe decided that Russia needed good old-fashioned free market shock therapy to basically help bring in a capitalist society in Russia. There's only one problem with that. A few people capitalized on it, pun intended. Many didn't, because they couldn't, because they didn't know how, or they didn't have the resources to know how. And in that environment, you had a lot of supporters who are backing the guy that's currently in charge of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who isn't exactly afraid to go after terrorists, and as long as he looks good to his voters and his supporters. And that's the problem. Donald Trump, in my opinion, wants to be like Vladimir Putin, a very strong leader. That's not how it works here. You see, we have a system here where the system prevails over any one president, be they Democratic or Republican. No matter who's in charge, the system is what matters most. And that's important to remember. But the thing about this battle, and I've said this many times before, is that we cannot win this easily. We can't define victory. We can win it eventually. We just have to be patient. And that's the important thing. We have to take a martial arts tactic, using the terrorist strengths against them. And if you do that, then you'll prevail. Because it's like you're trying to convince the very people the terrorists want to bring over to their side. You take those arguments away from them. Because what do these people really want that the terrorists are trying to bring over? They want basically peace and stability. They're not interested in democracy. They're not really interested in capitalism. They basically want to be left alone. And that's their key. Well, you essentially have to give them what they want. But their people, how's it going? The key here is that there are people who don't really look at what's going on there and look at it as a sense of people on equal terms with those of us in the West, and that's a problem. The thing about this battle is that we can win this, but we can easily lose it. If we're too arrogant and too stupid to realize that these people don't want ISIS to tell them how to live their lives, but they don't want us to tell them how to live their lives. So we essentially have to tell them, look, you don't have to follow our system or anything like that, but here's why you should, and win them over through argument and through evidence. And this is the problem in Iraq. We simply want to impose a system that worked for us, but looking back, isn't really working in Iraq. For so long, they've dealt with leaders with a single, strong man leader whose basically their word was law. The Shah before the Ayatollah in Iran, and there was a king before Saddam's immediate predecessor came in charge in Iraq. So you have to look through history to see that this is a pattern that's happened through this region for centuries and several thousand years. They're not used to democracy. Democracy, in a sense, is actually relatively new. It's not been here but a quarter of a millennia. In England, it's about the same. Maybe a little bit longer. So it's really, there was Greek democracy, but even that wasn't true, and that died out eventually because of eventual Roman conquest. But for most of human history, it's been the strong man with the biggest army that's been able to make the law. Now, that system is being tested, not just in the Middle East, but in Russia, and maybe even here. I'm not saying Donald Trump wants to be a dictator, but who's to say? He seems a little too cozy with Vladimir Putin, maybe in some cases envious of Vladimir Putin. So that's something to be concerned about. But in getting back to the London attacks, I think this attack in London is going to swing the election toward the Conservatives. Had this attack not happened, I think Labour wins a very narrow victory. But because of this, I think the Tories will swing a few key seats, and they will win, although the majority will be shrunk. And Theresa May will stay Prime Minister. Now, given all that doesn't really change Brexit. That doesn't really change the fact that Great Britain is leaving Europe. Even if Labour wins, the process is set in motion to leave Europe. And the terrorists want a hard Brexit. They want Great Britain to be alienated from Europe. It's a classic case of divide and conquer. Whereas if Jeremy Corbyn wins on early next week and Labour is able to form a government, then that means there's going to be a softer Brexit, which means that while Great Britain will not be a part of Europe, the European Union, a lot of the benefits of the European Union will be maintained, and maybe even eventually, say in 10 or 20 years, Great Britain rejoins the EU, whereas right now, there's still a lot of bitter feelings, and it may take a lot longer, maybe not even in my lifetime, when Great Britain rejoins the European Union, which I think will eventually happen, but it's just a matter of when. But let's not forget that this is a fight that will continue to go on. The question is, why haven't we seen more of these attacks in the United States? Well, for one thing, our intelligence services are very good. And secondly, look what happened the last time a major terrorist attack happened in the United States. ISIS isn't stupid. They may be crazy, but they're not stupid. That's important to remember. ISIS ain't stupid. So, if ISIS wants to give you a fight, and fight you head on, don't fall for the temptation, because that's a fight that while on the paper they may lose, in theory they may lose, in reality they'll win, because they'll convince the very people that are on the fence to jump over their side. Like I said earlier, they have home court advantage, and we're trying to win on their home court. And anybody that knows anything about sports knows it's always harder to win a game when you're on the road, even when you have a better team. So, in the analysis, I think that the London attacks have given ISIS pretty much what they wanted. They want a prime minister in England, I should say in Britain, that will continue a hard line against them. I'm sure there'll be retaliatory attacks from Britain and the United States soon enough on ISIS. What form that'll take, I'm not sure. But these are relatively small-time attacks. But the thing about terrorism is it's not so much the attacks themselves, it's the fear of the attacks, the fear of potential attacks. And that's what raises the stakes somewhat. It's not, oh my God, what happened? It's, oh my God, what will happen next? Is what you have to, is what that ISIS wants to impart into our mainframe of our brains. They want us to be scared of them. That we're going to get them. They're going to get, I should say, they're going to get us. They don't care if we strike back. As a matter of fact, they want us to attack them. They want us to kill lots of them. How do you fight an enemy like that? How do you fight an enemy that welcomes an attack that kills a lot of them? Cut off the head of the snake, it simply grows a new head. That's what we face in ISIS. Now, in theory, it worked against Al-Qaeda because eventually their leadership didn't have the skills to keep the organization as well run as they had under Osama bin Laden. And an argument can be made that Osama bin Laden's death has led to Al-Qaeda's overall strength being weakened. But the thing is, Al-Qaeda is more about its parts than its sum. You look at Al-Qaeda in Yemen. They're fighting a very brutal battle against Saudi Arabia in South Yemen, which is why Saudi Arabia had that little deal with the United States, $110 billion of arms that President Trump signed. You can imagine, you think, oh, well, ISIS is really hating that. No. That's what they want. Because it means that they can go to the people that don't like the Saudi government in Saudi Arabia and go, this is what they really want. They'll buy infidel arms to protect their corrupt regime. And that is their propaganda right there. They turn, you see where I'm going? It's the classic examples, they're taking a classic good guy move and twisting it around into a bad guy move. Making us look bad, making Saudi Arabia look bad. Not that Saudi Arabia is really an angel in any of this. But the problem is that Donald Trump is giving Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the other terrorist groups, the groups that will probably come after me, get rid of ISIS. Here's the thing. Trump and his ilk want a cleanly defined victory. Excuse me. Sorry about that, folks. Couldn't catch it in time. They want a clearly defined victory. One they can raise an old-fashioned newspaper above their heads and say, hey, we won the war. Well, that can't happen. Yeah, you might beat ISIS, but what's coming up? I mean, where's Al-Qaeda? Al-Qaeda's pretty much done. But they still, in a sense, exist. There's no clearly defined point where we beat them. We simply wore them down to the point where they're basically just a bunch of small, pretty much ineffective groups that really don't amount to much in the greater scheme of things. Not like they did when they attacked us on 9/11. It's pretty much ISIS's day now. They are in charge. They get to set the agenda for the radical Islamists. Who, you must remember, they're very small compared to the rest of the Islamic world, who are just like you and me, average, everyday folks, who simply want to live their lives in peace and security. That's what they want. And to say, well, all 1.3 billion people want to attack the United States and overthrow Judeo-Christian culture and impose Sharia law. They can't even agree on lunch, let alone that. So yeah, that ain't gonna happen. Sharia law, whatever, Sharia law is not gonna come to the United States anytime soon. You don't have to worry about that. But here's the thing. We do have to worry about dominionism. We do have to worry about people that are taking radical Christianity and putting it in our government because they feel like they need it in order to fight this enemy. And these people want what the groups like ISIS want. An apocalyptic showdown to bring about the end of the world. Or at least the end of the world for the other guys. And that's a dangerous thing. Folks like Pat Robertson and Jim Baker, you remember those people. You remember them from the 80s. They're not exactly what you'd call the most saintly people of all time. Pat Robertson's getting up in years. I think he may even be somewhat senile, but nobody's willing to tell him and let alone get him off the TV on his 700 Club show, which was Fox News before Fox News came along. And Jim Baker, of course, well, the guy's got to make a living. And he's gone from swindling you out of your money and promising you heaven, to swindling you out of your money to buy freeze-dried food because apocalypse may be coming. You know, have you seen this jerk lately? Have you seen what this idiot's been doing? Probably not. But I subscribe to a Facebook group called Right Wing Watch. And most of the people on there are lunatics who look at a shadow and go, oh my God, the black folks are coming to get me. It's that kind of thing. Well, Jim Bakker's amongst these people. And unfortunately, Jim Bakker isn't as big as he once was, but he's big enough to be able to afford putting on a TV show and selling crap that people will be suckered into buying, just like they were suckered into buying PTL timeshares 30 years ago, before that fell apart. And Jim Bakker is not dead, unfortunately. I guess it's because God and Satan have decided, no, we don't want him. No, I don't want him. No, you don't want him. No, I don't want him. No, I don't want him. It's like Pat Robertson, they're still alive because neither side really wants him. God don't want him, and the devil don't want him. And I guess the devil finally said, okay, I'll take Jerry Falwell. And God's like, okay, fine. You take Jerry Falwell and I'll take Chris Cornell. God rest his soul. Whew, it's hot out here. But the fact is, terrorism has been going on for, this is not new, folks. If you've been around, if you're of a certain age, you know that terrorism was around in the 80s, it was around in the 70s, and reality it's been around for a long, long time. Hell, you could even make the argument that the start of the Revolutionary War was a bunch of terrorists fighting against the Tories that ruled the United States at the time, or before it became the United States. And there is where ISIS hangs their hat on it. Hey, if it worked for them, it can work for us. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And this is their argument. They look at us as being colonialists who want to enslave them so that their resources can be used for our profit, which essentially is corporate profit, not you and me profit. So, but in their minds, all Americans are evil people who want to crucify them and turn them into sinful creatures who wear practically nothing and engage in orgies all day. That's what they're essentially saying, is that they want to debase their culture, that we want to debase their culture. And that's a pretty powerful argument. Here's the crazy thing. If you look at it, the right-wingers here are using the same kind of arguments against the Muslims as the ISIS is using against the Christians over there. And it would not surprise me one bit if there are people in the middle of the fight who are helping both sides and going, we could make a very sweet profit off of all of this. Yeah, a lot of people will die, but hey, a lot of people are going to die anyway. So why not kill them sooner and make a boatload of money? Yep, folks, it all comes down to what good old Ike Eisenhower warned us against back in the day. The military-industrial complex. It got to the point where we were reluctant to go into war. Ever since then, Vietnam, Grenada, Beirut, Lebanon, Panama, Iraq, first time, the former Yugoslavia, Iraq a second time, Afghanistan, and so on and so forth, Somalia, places like that. But they don't want us to win a quick, decisive victory. Oh no, they want us to be there a while. Because the longer we stay there, the more equipment we need, the more money they make. So yeah, that is the crux of their argument. And that is why we have to be very careful. Because eventually, if we're not careful, that argument that, hey, the military-industrial complex has to be fed, that's going to be regurgitating all over us, meaning Americans are going to get killed by weapons that the terrorists have gotten from that very same military-industrial complex. And it may even be a chemical or biological, and maybe, God forbid, a nuclear weapon. Well, I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to say this. Don't let the terrorists have you living in fear. We outnumber them. They're a bunch of bugs. What do you do to bugs? You squash them. And then you call the exterminator, and you seed the ground with the stuff that they can't live off of, and you starve them to death. And that's what we have to do. We have to cut off their funding, their ability to raise funds. We have to cut off their ability to produce propaganda and to convince people to go to their side. And we have to use their very own force against them. And that's the important thing. We'll win this battle eventually. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The only question is, how many die in the process? And if we fight the fight that Donald Trump wants, a lot of people are going to die, and the war is going to take a lot longer than it needs to. If we fight the smarter war, the propaganda war, the financial war, we'll win the battle a lot sooner than you would expect. So, be brave, be smart, and continue to listen to the John Thomas Hill Show as we read between the lines. We bring you the facts and the analysis from a moderate point of view. So until next time, folks, good night, or I should say good day, good luck, and may the good news be yours.